Section 11.3.15-T. A researcher wanted to determine if carpeted rooms contain more bacteria than uncarpeted rooms. The table shows the results for the number of bacteria per cubic foot for both types of rooms. Okay, so to test the statement that carpeted rooms have more bacteria than the uncarpeted rooms at the alpha equals 0.05 level of significance. Well, the reason why we're testing it at 0.05 is because we're not given a significance level. When it's not given, then you always use 0.05. Now, we want to be able to test the normal probability plots so that it indicates that the data are approximately normal, and box plots indicate that there are no outliers. Now, to test the hypothesis regarding the two population means obtained from the independent samples, we're going to use the following steps, provided that the two independent samples are obtained by simple random sampling or the data result from a completely randomized experiment with two treatments, which checks here. The sample data come from a population that is normally distributed with no outliers, which we're going to check on StatCrunch, or the sample sizes are large, meaning greater than or equal to 30, but these are not greater than or equal to 30, so we need to check for the normal distribution and no outliers. And then for each example, the sample size is no more than 5% of the population size. Well, we can see here that this is going to be a lot less than the population size. Now, we want to be able to determine the null and the alternative hypotheses. So the hypotheses are structured in one of three ways. We have a two-tailed, where we have the null has the equality, the alternative is the not equals. The left-tailed, where the null is equals and the alternative is less than. The right-tailed, where the null is equals and the alternative is greater than, where we're comparing two population means. We're going to let population 1 be the carpeted rooms and population 2 be the uncarpeted rooms. Okay, so we're going to use StatCrunch. Before we use StatCrunch, okay, with the following steps, we want to be able to do is check for normal distribution and the box plots. So let's go ahead and open this data up in StatCrunch. So what you would do is, if you didn't have the data, okay, this data is automatically entered in through the problem. If you didn't have the data, then you would enter that in. You'd have your first column, you'd write your data, your second column, and then write your data. The first thing we want to do is we want to be able to graph. Okay, so let's graph a QQ plot. Okay, we're going to select carpeted, we're going to select uncarpeted. We're going to put the correlation statistic and the normal quantiles on the y-axis. So let's select compute. So for the carpeted, we can see that the correlation coefficient is 0.977. And the line here shows us a linear situation, so it's normal for carpeted. If we scroll to the right and take a look at the uncarpeted, again, the correlation is 0.971, and it gives us a linear situation. So far, it gives us a normal distribution for the graphs. Now we need to check for outliers. So in order to do that, we're going to go back to graph, and then we're going to select box plot. Okay, so we're going to have carpeted, and then hit the control button for uncarpeted. We want to make sure that we use fences to identify the outliers to make sure there aren't any outliers, and then draw boxes horizontally. So let's go ahead and select compute. So here we can see that there aren't any outliers for the uncarpeted, and there aren't any outliers for the carpeted. So therefore that verifies what we needed to do for the testing to make sure that we can proceed with the hypothesis test. Now before we go into StatCrunch, we need to write down what is our null and what is our alternative hypothesis. So we know that the null is going to have the equality. So we know that the null is always going to have population mean 1, which is equal to population mean 2. And then what we want to do is we want to find the alternative. So the alternative is going to be the claim that's in the question itself. So let's go back to the top. It says a researcher wanted to determine if carpeted rooms, which is population mean number 1, contains more meaning greater than, okay, the uncarpeted rooms, which is population mean 2. So that means we're going to have greater than here. So now step 2, we know it's going to be a right tail. And then step 3, we know that the significance level is going to be 0.05. Okay, now for step 4, we want to be able to find that test statistic by using StatCrunch. And then in step 5, we also want to be able to look at what does the drawing look like. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use StatCrunch. So opening up StatCrunch, okay, now that we entered the data into the both columns, we're going to select Stat and then we're going to scroll down all the way to T-stats, and then we're going to select to sample, and it's going to be with data because we put the data in both columns. So we're going to select with data. Okay, the values in the first column are going to be the carpeted. The values in the second column are going to be the uncarpeted. Okay, we want to make sure that the pool variance is unchecked, which it is unchecked in this particular example. Okay, and then we know that population mean 1 minus population mean 2 is equal to 0, because if we solved and subtracted mu subscript 2 to both sides, it's going to equal 0. So we know it's equal to 0. And then what do we know? We know that the alternative is going to be the greater than 0. Okay, and so therefore there's our information. Okay, and so now we have that, and now we're going to go ahead and select compute. Okay, so now let's go ahead and copy this information. So we can analyze the data from StatCrunch. Well, again, we can see here that in the data here, we have the mean, right? So we can see that the sampling difference, the standard error, the degrees of freedom, and the test statistic. Well, what is the test statistic? Well, the test statistic that we get from StatCrunch is 1.41. Okay, so now we need to draw and show what that looks like. So we know that our mean for the graph is going to be 0. We also know that our test statistic is located right here, which is 1.41. And then what we want to do is we want to find that p-value. So the p-value is given in our data here. So there is the p-value, and we're going to round that to 3 decimal places. If we round that to 3 decimal places, then we get 0.090. Okay, and now what we are ready to then compare the p-value to the significance level and then write our conclusion. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we know that in step 6, the null hypothesis is rejected if the p-value is less than the significance level. Well, the p-value is 0.90. We know it's greater than the significant level of 0.05, so we do not reject the null hypothesis. So therefore, we're going to say there is not significant evidence at the alpha equals 0.05 level of significance to conclude that carpeted rooms have more bacteria than uncarpeted rooms.